Let's take a short break with a homegrown uplifting track. This is Be Who You Wanna Be from Newcastle band Never Say Never Music.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. This is for the hustle.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. Come on, use that muscle.
Check out Be Who You Wanna Be and more from Never Say Never Music on your favourite streaming platform or visit neversaynevermusic.com.
Bring it back.
This is Towards Understanding. I'm Clayton Bjellan, and certainly one person who has been spending many years, decades in fact, helping others head towards a better understanding of God and his role in humanity and how we fit in with God is a lady by the name of Dr. Amy Orr-Ewing, and it is an absolute pleasure to have her on the program with us. Amy, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Clayton. Great to join you.
It is wonderful to talk to you. Now, you're in the world of apologetics, and some may understand what that means, others may not. Could you explain to us, what does it actually mean? How do you define that?
Yeah, so apologetics, that word doesn't mean apologising. That's the first thing I would say. It comes from the Greek word apologia, and as Christians, we read the Bible as God's word, and the New Testament was originally written in Greek, and that word apologia meant or described what would happen if you were accused of a crime and a lawyer would speak on your behalf in a kind of courtroom situation. He would make an apologia for you. So it's like speaking persuasively to share the truth with other people. And so within the Christian faith, that word apologetics or apologia has been used since the first century to describe what Christians would do as we engage with people and talk to people who have different perspectives, people who are investigating faith, people who, really disagree. And it describes what we're doing when we're talking about Christianity and about Jesus in a persuasive way, in a way that is sort of revealing the truth of who God is to others. So it's really about kind of making connections between faith and the real world. It's about overcoming barriers and obstacles to belief. And it's about sharing our convictions and perhaps even our personal experiences in a way that connects with others.
It sort of, in my mind, has this remarkable blend between sort of, deep academic, deep understanding of a philosophical nature and sort of this practical idea of wanting to try and talk to the everyday sort of person and help them understand as well. What drew you to this sort of line of work, if we want to call it that?
Yeah. So I think that's right. I think apologetics can be sort of practiced differently by different ones of us. So you're right. There's a deep underpinning around worldview and philosophical truth and evidence and connection to reality. But in its most simple form, it's about speaking to ordinary people as an ordinary person oneself and sharing our faith in a way that connects with them. So what drew me to this was, living in Britain as I do and growing up in this country, and often being either in a very extreme minority as a Christian, as a follower of Jesus, or being the only one. So, that was very much my experience at school and as a young person. So if you want to have conversations with friends and with people around you in your life, and as you get into your adulthood, that might be in your workplace or your wider family, then apologetics is just going to be needed, even if you don't know what the word is. So I think I was doing apologetics, at university, sharing my faith, answering people's questions about faith, but I didn't really know the word particularly identify with the word. But as it became something that I was good at, I studied theology, and I began to have wider opportunities to kind of give talks about the Christian faith and answer people's questions. And that's really when I guess it came more onto the horizon of something that I do professionally. So it evolved really out of just the natural need for this in life. If you're living in a country or in a community where you're not 100% surrounded by Christians, and it grew from that into a real calling from God. And, it's ended up, I've sort of been around the world, spoken in 40 countries, written books. It's been a journey, let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And you always bring this remarkable smile to your voice and energy in each time, which I think is just allows people to have that honest conversation with you, Amy. Let's sort of bring that to one of your books is Why Trust the Bible. Now, I suppose there is a difference between trusting God and trusting the Bible and what it means of faith. But obviously the Bible is such a central understanding of those who follow a Christian faith and follow Jesus in that way. I know you're certainly a big believer, and apologetics is not just sort of about this idea to say, well, we've thought it all through, you should just believe us because we say so. It's actually the opposite of that. It's this opportunity to actually ask deep questions. How did you, I think there's sort of the idea in this book, answer 10 tough questions. Firstly, how did you limit it to just 10 questions? And then what were some of those questions that you went, well, these are the key ones I should talk about?
Yeah, so I wrote Why Trust the Bible in 2004, would you believe? So it feels like, and I have updated it. So a new version came out in 2020. So I wrote that book because I realised that in doing apologetics and I was doing a lot of campus outreach. So, you're on campus, perhaps giving a short talk about the Christian faith. The majority of people there don't share any kind of faith perspective. Some will be hostile, some are interested. There's a lot of question and answer happening. Some are really drawn to God and to belief and beginning to perhaps want to become a Christian and follow Jesus, but have no background at all, no kind of biblical literacy or understanding. And so what tended to happen is whether people were hostile or, really drawn to Jesus, a whole cluster of questions tended to arise at some point on that journey about the Bible. And I began to notice that the sort of material that existed within, my wing, let's put it like this, wing of the church, which would be, kind of modern day Christians who believe the Bible is true. But the apologetics around the Bible was very focused on the manuscript tradition, the text. It was like the questions of the 1950s, you could say. Is it true? Those sorts of questions, and can we really trust the text? But I found that in the 1990s and early 2000s, people were asking different questions from that. They did want to know something about that, but they were also asking, well, hold on a minute, those modern framing of everything says that everything is about power and, everyone's interpretation of things is kind of skewed by power, but also on the other hand, equally valid. Isn't everything just a matter of interpretation? Aren't there all these Christians who've weaponized the Bible to make it mean what they want it to mean? And you're just doing the same. And what would be stopping me doing the same? We can't actually read the Bible and access anything about God or truth or reality because we're stuck in this loop of postmodernism. We just impose meaning on every text. So I thought, okay, I need to write a chapter about that. And then there were people who were like, well, all history is the victor's history. So everything that we know about history has come to us through the lens of the powerful who sort of wrote down their view. And so if the Bible is historical, then it's just the victor's history. And how can we trust and base our life on something that is historical? So I thought, okay, I need to write a chapter on that. And then, people would be asking, isn't the Bible sexist? It's very patriarchal and it's kind of responsible for oppressing women. I need to write a chapter on that. Didn't a group of people, men, just get together and decide what was going to be in the Bible? The canon is, how could you say that is God's word? Men decided it. So I need to write a chapter on that. What about the other holy books? What about wars in the Old Testament? What about sex and sexuality? So I found really that book arose out of the heart cry of that generation that I was trying to reach, who'd been massively influenced by postmodern thinking. And in my update to it in 2020, really updated it to sort of address how kind of critical theory and, identity politics has also then shaped the thinking of the last 10 years, as it were. So it's about taking what people's questions actually are about the Bible and trying to answer them and help people see in the Bible we have something really powerful, interesting, something that can lead us into truth and into relationship with God. But we need to wrestle through some of the questions around it.
Amy, in all your various conversations, whether it be, on the university campus, whether it be into the halls of power in the UK or the US or wherever it might be you've spoken, is there a question that people tend to come to? I know I'm thinking you've written another book around where is God in all the suffering. It tends to be an often question people come to.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the question that sort of everyone ends up coming around to? Is there something else that you're seeing at the moment, or is it always just different for different people?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are. I think my understanding is that there are sort of timeless questions that are deeply human questions about meaning, about why are we here, and how that connects to our origins and who God is, and what it actually means to come to know God. There are timeless questions around suffering and evil, whether that's sort of external to us and we have experienced great harm in this world and we're devastated and we wonder how could God be loving, or whether it's kind of looking within our own hearts and wrestling with the powers of addiction and the powers that just seem to operate through us and spoil our relationships in the world and our need for a saviour. I think there are those sort of timeless questions, and then there are more zeitgeisty questions that arise. And I would say, I've been involved in apologetics and ministry for over 25 years, and in the first 10 years, those questions in the West, so Australia, the US, Europe, were massively influenced by postmodern thinking, power dynamics, the idea of relativism, that all truth is just, personal, and who are you to impose your view on someone else, and there isn't one sort of truth. There couldn't be like one way to God, that sort of thinking. And then I would say the second, between about sort of the early 2010s through to sort of 2017-ish, it was all around the new atheism. So the rise of this sort of militant idea that belief in God is the problem. And that was partly caused by the geopolitical things that were happening, the rise of jihadi Islam, and then all the war and conflict. And, religion is the problem, it's the cause of war, and we just blob all religion together and say atheism is what will save human beings. And then I would say for the last 7 years, it's been more the culture war stuff, so identity politics and the idea that we're sort of defined through this lens of intersectional grievance, victimhood and rage, and that the Christian faith is, sort of oppressive, or has been oppressive, or is somehow trying to deny me my chosen adopted identity. And that being very divisive then in the culture war that's happening right now. So the apologetic zeitgeisty questions tend to arise in pockets, but you've always got those deeper, more human questions about meaning, about suffering, about truth. And I think about trust. So there's this question, can I trust God? Can I trust the church? Can I trust the Bible? Can I trust you as a Christian when you're telling me this, that you're not trying to scam me in some way? I think those more timeless questions run through, and then we have these pockets of other questions that spike, but all of them come up all of the time as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But there's a sort of emphasis in the cluster. So with atheism, there's been a big emphasis around science and faith. Has science disproved God? And more kind of philosophical reasoning about God. And that's less of interest now. It doesn't mean it never comes up.
My guest on Towards Understanding is Dr. Amy Orr-Ewing. We're going to be back talking a bit more around this idea of apologetics. I want to ask Amy as well, does she have moments where she's looking for sort of absolute assurance on something, or is she okay with sort of grey areas, and how does she process that through in an environment and a world where we were just talking about there, which is looking for sort of this sense of a scientific fact on these ideas? So we'll ask her personal take on that. And also she has written her most recent book, Lead Like the Real You. Wisdom for Women on Finding Voice, Pursuing God's Calling, Leading with Courage. These are all parts of what this book is about. We're going to talk to Amy about that next here on Towards Understanding.
Share your brand, your event, your message across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand by sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielen. More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week, and with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
Amy, I wanted to talk to you. We've been talking about this idea of, how you're answering lots of questions, you're having conversations on all sorts of things, on trustworthiness of the Bible, of believing in various aspects. I know often it's sort of framed around this idea, do you really believe in? And then these are some of the answers that you do give. From your perspective, are you okay to live with some of the grey that perhaps comes up in Christian faith understandings? There's some things that I feel like we sort of need to know that's black and white, and some areas are grey. Some people feel quite uncomfortable in that. How do you sort of approach aspects of faith that perhaps for some might say, well, that feels a bit grey rather than black and white?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's a really important question. Today, particularly today where we are, with the algorithm being pushed into more and more sort of division and almost like a toxic certainty on things that perhaps are not as clear or certain as we would hope. So I think as a Christian, there are some fundamentals that it is important that we're not grey on. And those would be around, the person of God, the value of people created in the image of God, the truth of the scriptures, the truth of the resurrection of Christ, and having, I guess, a loyalty and commitment that is then a sort of settled conviction that I'm living my life on the basis of a solid foundation that is in God, and that is external to me. This isn't something I've made up, and it's not subjective. God is actually there. Jesus did, come as God with us. He did rise from the dead. We can know about this through the scriptures, and that's a wonderful basis for confidence in God and not in ourselves or our own abilities. But then, of course, there are huge things about the world that we don't fully understand. We see in part, but we don't fully understand because we're not God, and we can make the mistake of thinking we need to, if we take the question of suffering, for example, that we need to understand it exhaustively. And, some people make the mistake of saying, well, because I can't understand it exhaustively, I can't understand it at all. And so we just don't ever talk about it. There are no answers at all about how you could reconcile a God of love with the suffering world. That's one mistake. Or the other mistake would be to say, well, we can answer it all. There are no grey areas and, no things that trouble us. And I think as a mature Christian, I can live in the space where I can say, God has shown us enough to see that he is loving, and he did make a world that was good, and he did give us a will, and there are consequences to the exercise of our will that the Bible calls, the fall. And on that basis, though, sin and death and evil and suffering have entered the world, and how that works out now then into eternity. There are going to be some areas that I don't understand. I don't understand why God sometimes intervenes and doesn't at other times, for example, because he's actually God and I'm not. But that doesn't mean he doesn't exist or he's not loving, or there aren't aspects of this that we can understand. So I think sometimes as Christians we get into a mess by putting things in the wrong column, if that makes sense. So we put areas that, where the Bible isn't totally definitive, we put those areas into, I must have this very defined, and other areas where the Bible is very definitive and say, oh, we can't really know that. And so part of the job of growing in maturity in Christ, of reading the scriptures, of walking with Jesus, is untangling some of those things and maybe coming to a place of peace about our own limitation, our own human frailty, and, God being God and trusting him, but also being mature enough to do the work and do the research and do the study and search the scriptures so that we do come to settle convictions on important things.
Amy, you've had conversations around all sorts of topics around faith over the past, number of years that you've been involved in that sort of public speaking and having conversations.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, I saw a recent video that was talking about is online gaming something that can be godly? I'm like, well, that's an interesting question you got involved in. I'm wondering what's the most fun question that perhaps someone's ever asked you, or the most sort of, wow, that's a great one. I've never thought of that before. That to have and connect to something of faith.
Okay, well, This is from a colleague that I was with. So a former colleague, a wonderful man called Professor John Lennox, doing a Q&A with him. And the wonderful thing about Q&A or Q&R is that, you have no idea and no control over what question is coming. So, it could be some absolutely crazy question, or it could be some really detailed thing where you've got to sort of be on it. And, that there's a joy in that, but also dependency on God. So the question comes in, what about extraterrestrial life? So we're doing this big youth conference in London. We've got over 1,000 teenagers, high schoolers there. What about extraterrestrial life? I'm thinking, oh no, I really don't want to answer that. So John Lennox steps in and he's like, well, the Bible talks about extraterrestrials. They're called angels. It goes into this whole thing about this category. So anyway, it was absolutely hilarious and brilliant. And I thought, thank God for John Lennox, because I have nothing for that question.
I love that. I love that. That's always good. Go in pairs as well. You can back each other up when those things happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Amy, one of the things that I love that you've been, especially talking about in the last little while, has been a focus more around women in ministry, but women in leadership as well. And I know your latest book, Lead Like the Real You, focuses really around this. I would imagine, and maybe I'm imagining wrong, that there has probably been over the years that you're one of the fewer women who are in this space that you are in and around the world. Was that part of the reason that you said, hey, look, I wanted to focus on a book like this to encourage others to talk about others, or was there other reasons?
Yeah. So, for 25 plus years, I've been, working in public theology, evangelism, apologetics, and I was often invited into spaces where, I was the first woman to do whatever was the thing, whether it was speaking at the conference or leading the mission or, those kinds of experiences. And there's a particular challenge to that. I think there are, real dimensions of challenge. And I'm so grateful for male mentors that I had in my life, people like Michael Green, who was a phenomenal evangelist and scholar, who really, poured into me. I'm so grateful for him. Alistair McGrath, an extraordinary scholar, theologian, apologist. Just absolutely key points, amazing advice, but also just, utterly inspirational and wonderful to have known him, and benefited from his wisdom. But, honestly, I didn't have female role models in what I have ended up doing, because they're just, I didn't know of or see women operating in this sphere. And, my ministry hasn't been about, only ministering to women, but one aspect of it certainly has been at times, mentoring and helping raise up and encourage and teach other women. And I think got to a point in midlife, where you're kind of thinking about lots of things and assessing different things, that I realized there might be some value in writing a book that just captured some of the things that would have been helpful to know 10 or 20 years ago, but because of the paucity, the lack of female mentors and role models, I didn't have the benefit of that, and one can't mentor everyone that asks to be mentored. So I thought I'm going to start just writing some letters, which initially were for a smaller sort of group of people that captured some of that learning, some of that reflection, and obviously it ended up becoming a book. But the heart behind it being letters as well was that, so much in the church around leadership is taken from business studies or, management theory. There's so much, follow this acronym or these sort of practices or structures, and, that's how you lead. But actually the way Jesus modeled raising up leaders and disciples was life on life. So that's why I kind of went with the letter format. And I also wanted to, share vulnerably from some of the things that have been really hard, without it being a sort of misery memoir or, a kind of complaining thing, but actually to say, look, here are hard things, but here are reflections on those hard things. Here's the gold that has come out of some of those, those darker days and more difficult experiences. And, here are wonderful things as well. So, yeah, it's a book of letters written from me, a woman in midlife who's had the opportunity to lead, and the idea being, what would it have been helpful to know that no one tells you, or very few people tell you?
As we get towards the end of our conversation today as well, I wanted to ask to speak to a couple of groups of people. Those who are listening right now and who perhaps may be, Christian, following in that faith, and want to share better with friends, with family. One of your sort of core understandings is, hey, look, I think if we can sensibly answer some of the concerns of those who are truly seeking, they will come to an understanding of Jesus, and that's what we desire for them.
Mm-hmm.
We believe that's the best for them. What would be your encouragement to them? I mean, presumably other than, reading your books, watching the videos and all the things that you're involved in, maybe that is the answer, that's fine. What would be sort of a good first step for them?
Yeah, so I think one of the dangers with apologetics and, with people like me who sort of do this, write books and kind of speak and that sort of thing, is that Christians, up and down the country can feel, well, I'm not an expert and I could never do that. But actually, if we go back to that 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer, an apologia, to everyone who asks you for the reasons of the hope within, and do it with gentleness and respect. And that's, apologetics is a gift to the whole church, and all it means is speaking persuasively, and in an evidence-based way, about Christ with others. And I think I would want to encourage everyone listening to this to decide to make yourself a bit vulnerable and step out and do it. The way you get better at doing it is by doing it. The second thing I would say is that learn how to sort of listen well and ask questions in conversations, and don't always think that apologetics has to be about giving answers. Often it can be about asking good questions. And then the third thing I would say is, if you are held back by a fear of I won't know the answer, something you can do that I still do is if someone asks me a question in a conversation, I think I don't know the answer to that. I say, do you know what? I don't think I know the answer to that. I'd really like, can I think about that? I'd love to think about it, but I really want to continue the conversation. Can we meet next week, or can we talk about it tomorrow, depending on, what the context is, after I've had the opportunity to go away and think about it a bit. And then, you can do a bit of research, call your pastor, perhaps read one of the books that's been mentioned or a chapter in one of the books, and equip yourself to then go back into that conversation. And people don't, people respect that. That's a good thing. It's much better to do that than to pretend something you don't know. People are interested in authenticity and truth. And Jesus is the one who draws people to himself. We just get to be part of it. So I just encourage you to go for it, to step out. And also that there are seeking people, hungry people, open people everywhere. And we're sort of missing out on seeing them come to Jesus because we're afraid. So that I think would be what I would want to say to that.
Amy, we also know that there's in people in our listening audience who are perhaps exactly in that situation. They've listened to you today and they've gone, wow, she seems so friendly. She feels like she's quite humble and open and honest about these sorts of things. I would actually like to know a bit more about Jesus. I would like to understand more. What do you consider the first best step for somebody in that instance who, right now we don't know specifically who they are, but they're listening right now?
Yeah, thank you. Well, if that's you and there's a bit of a kind of stirring in your heart, a sort of, your spidey senses are tingling and you're wondering, wow, could this be what I've been looking for? Could it be true that there is a God, and that God actually is inviting me into relationship? Then my first encouragement would be to pray what's called the agnostic prayer, which is just pray every day. God, if you're there, reveal yourself to me. God, if you're there, show yourself to me. I think that's really good. And I think a second thing that I would encourage you to do is to start with one of the eyewitness accounts about the life of Jesus. Perhaps pick up John's Gospel or Luke's Gospel. You can actually read them online. There's free Bibles online. You can look it up on it's called YouVersion, or, anyway, just type it in and just read through an account of the life of Jesus. I love John's Gospel because, in the prologue, the sort of beginning few words of that Gospel, it talks about, the God who made the world, the Logos, through whom everything was made, taking flesh and coming and dwelling among us. So you get this sort of overview of the meaning of this big idea that God has brought the world into existence, that he longs for a relationship with us, and that he's come into the world in Jesus, and that we can actually come to know God through his son Jesus, and that changes our lives and gives us a different quality of life and experience of life now and also beyond the grave, forgiveness of sins, and absolutely fresh new start. And then the Gospel, the rest of it actually describes the life of Jesus and shows in kind of real practicality what that looked like in flesh and blood. And I think that's amazing. And then the third thing I would say is to read a Gospel, pray the agnostic's prayer. And then the third thing I would say is I'd encourage you to find a context, maybe a church where there's sort of opportunity for seekers, maybe something like the Alpha course, or drop along to a church. I don't know if you've seen the recent statistics about Gen Z showing up in church, wanting to find community and wanting to find out what other people who believe in God are doing and how they're processing it. So maybe call a Christian friend if you've got one, and look up what your local churches are in your community, and show up and give it a go, give it a try. Those would be the three things I would suggest.
Amy, thank you so much. We weren't deep diving on every single topic that you've talked about. We could be here for literally, years and years if we did that. So thank you for giving us a taste across all of it. Thank you for the work that you are doing, answering and being open about tough questions of faith. And we do encourage certainly everyone to do that and to step into the various spaces and places around that as well. I so appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Amy Orr-Ewing, my guest on Towards Understanding.
Let's take a short break with a homegrown uplifting track. This is Be Who You Wanna Be from Newcastle band Never Say Never Music.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. This is for the hustle.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. Come on, use that muscle.
Check out Be Who You Wanna Be and more from Never Say Never Music on your favourite streaming platform, or visit neversaynevermusic.com.
Bring it back.